So you get a new motherboard, you install it, and you try to boot. Unfortunately, it seems that in the BIOS your boot drive is actually missing. No boot drive means no OS, so your shiny new upgraded computer is essentially useless. So what gives? Why is your boot drive missing? And better yet, how the heck do you get it back? Hi, and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus, the Tribble. So there are two potential solutions to this problem. Let's start with the easiest one first. In some cases, your OS installer won't be able to see your boot drive either. That's because it's set as an MBR drive, not a GPT drive. Now, if you want the full story, check out my article, Convert Your Windows 10 Boot Drive from MBR to GPT. And that also, of course, applies to Windows 11. So, here I'm just going to give you the short version. The BIOS, or UEFI in modern computers, is essentially firmware or code that runs on the motherboard, separate from the operating system. When your computer is booting before Windows actually starts loading, you can tap a key on your keyboard, usually F2 or the delete key, and you can go into the BIOS configuration settings menu, series of menus. You can configure everything, including the actual boot process itself. When you power on your computer, this firmware runs, it detects all the devices, it sets up everything, and then it passes off control of the computer to the operating system, such as Windows. Now that's when MBR or GPT on your hard drive takes over. MBR, or Master Boot Record, is kind of the old way for the OS to fire its bootloader and load Windows, Linux, or whatever. Now, MBR drives are limited to only 2 terabytes, and the MBR boot process dates all the way back to 1983. Enter GPT, or the GUID partition table. GPT-configured drives have a different type of partition table and a bootloader process that's much more modern. GPT also allows for boot drives larger than 2 terabytes and much faster boot times. So at this point you're going, that's great, Scotty, but what the heck does this have to do with my missing boot drive? Easy. If your boot drive is still set to MBR, then CSM, or Compatibility Support Module, must be enabled in the BIOS, in the firmware setting of your motherboard. If it's not, you can't boot. CSM is another function of your motherboard's firmware that allows you to boot either the old BIOS way or the newfangled UEFI way. And sometimes a combination of the two. If CSM isn't enabled, then the firmware can't actually find your boot drive, and then you're stuck. If you want to convert your MBR boot drive into a GPT drive, see the instructional article that I just mentioned. The link's, of course, down below in the description. Now, if you look at that article and you check out all the details, you're going to realize quite quickly that it gets pretty darn hairy pretty fast. So, fortunately, there is some good news. We have a second solution that will most likely solve your problem and is a lot easier. Beginning with Intel's 500 series of chipsets, integrated graphics won't work anymore with the older legacy BIOS plus MBR type drive boot process. The reason is that they ended support for the old-fashioned VBIOS way of booting, and so modern integrated graphics only work with the newfangled UEFI/GPT way of booting. In fact, you may notice when using your processor's integrated graphics that the ability to enable CSM in your BIOS setup is actually grayed out. So in addition to converting your MBR drive to GPT to make it show up again, you could also just install a dedicated graphics card instead of using your processor's integrated graphics. That would also solve the problem. Most likely, whatever dedicated graphics card you have does actually still support the VBIOS way of booting. So you just install it, and that will allow you to once again enable CSM on your motherboard, which will allow legacy boot, or a combination of newfangled and legacy boot, and poof, your hard drive that was missing will show up again, simply by installing a graphics card. So to recap, the problem is really the old way of doing things in your motherboard and hard drive versus the new way of doing things in your motherboard and hard drive. Progress is sometimes a little miserable. Ultimately, you will want to upgrade to full UEFI, CSM disabled, and a GPT configured disk, and just ditch the old school way of booting up. And I'm afraid the best way of doing that is a clean install of the operating system. Shiny new OS on a shiny new computer. For more details, don't miss my articles on this complex and hair-pulling Audi subject. Links down in the description. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.